for new moms especially, I think that it is very important to follow your gut. Now, going into hopefully a second pregnancy in the fall, I will be so much more confident knowing that no, like nobody else knows your body more than you, or no, your provider doesn't know more than you. You truly know more than you think you know. So lean into those feelings, lean into your gut, because once you have your baby, you're going to look back and realize you were right all along.
All right, let's get started with our reviewer of the week, who is KLC Style. And she says, the soundtrack of my third pregnancy. If you're thirsty for knowledge and want to dive deep into pregnancy learning, then this podcast is for you. I have already been through pregnancy twice with pretty good experiences, but the My Essential Birth podcast has expanded my understanding of not only the birth process, but with tools to help me navigate the ever-changing medical landscape of pregnancy and birth. Amen. That is exactly why I'm here. I feel like I should highlight that and send it to everybody. Yes, that's why you're here. I think the greatest tool of all is the in-depth research that Stephanie provides, as well as a relatable and caring touch. Stephanie is not only a great host, but someone who truly cares about her listeners and wants to help women have a positive birth experience. I know this because she has discussed my questions personally and given me resources to explore on my own. I'm so glad I found this podcast. Thank you so much for that review. And for those of you that are listening, yes, this, I hope, is what the podcast is all about. That you guys can come here, feel supported, get empowered, and leave with knowledge that you can take with you into your birth space. The other part of that she talked about was being able to be in touch with me. And if you guys ever have any questions, or you have topics you want covered, or anything, you have a question about something in the episode, you can email us at hello@myessentialbirth.com, or you can DM me at myessentialbirth on Instagram. So totally available in here for you guys. That's what it's all about. I love connecting with you. Definitely hit me up in the DMs or shoot us an email. Now, today is not just a birth story, but it is also an incredible birth story. I have with me here Taylor Dilk, and if you don't know her, she is crazy popular on Instagram, which I didn't know at first, and then I started following her after she started talking about the podcast, and I was like, who is this cute chick? And started following her on Instagram, and she has the cutest stuff, and you're going to hear all about some of her stuff today. But she is the mama of an 11th month old. His name is Dallas. So yes, I was going to comment on that because he is coming up to that 1-year birthday this month, which is so cool. She's the co-founder and CEO of Athleisure Brand Vitality. So you will see if you go follow her, and we'll give you all of the places to follow her on her Instagram. She is chock full of the cutest athletic wear ever, and she has pregnancy stuff too, which is really fun. And she's also a fitness and lifestyle influencer. So you guys are in for a treat today. The thing that it's not all of that fun stuff, which I think is incredible about her. That is not what tipped me off and made me say, I definitely need you to share your birth story on the podcast. It was the way that she presented her birth story on her blog and on her Instagram. So for everybody listening, Taylor, will you take a moment and say hello? Tell us, just give me, let's do an icebreaker. So either give me some really funny meme that you've seen recently, or a favorite guilty pleasure snack, or we can just talk about your sourdough starter and how's that's going, because I keep killing mine.
Oh my God. Well, first of all, what an intro. I feel like a queen. Thank you so much, Stephanie. You are incredible, and I am honored to be here. You have made such an impact on my life in so many ways that you don't even know, that we'll probably dive into. Um, but I'm just so grateful to be here, and thank you so much. And on the sourdough starter, let me tell you, I'm about 2 months in, and I feel like I'm still on a sourdough high, where as you get used to it, I could see me not feeding my starter when I start getting a little bored of it. So trust me, I'll probably kill my starter here soon, but I'm still on that sourdough high. And my husband just make more sourdough every day. I don't know if yours is the same way, but oh my God. And Dallas likes it too. So I'm a sourdough girl. I boarded the train 2 months ago, and it's amazing.
I love it. I've tried it for a good
But
5 months now. No luck. My husband is doing better than I am. At this point, he's working on it. But we wanted to do it from the beginning. We didn't buy a starter. We're we're going to do this ourselves. And we're man, we're not good at this. We're just not.
we're not, well, I don't know if I could do that. Just make my own starter because there's a lot of steps in it. It takes a while. So if you ever need a starter, I bought mine, but it's really good. I'll send you some.
Okay. I love that. Yes, I might totally take you up on that. I love that. All right, but let's dive into why we're here today. So let's talk about pregnancy. I kind of wanted to walk through like your pregnancy, birth, and postpartum because you had some really cool stuff all throughout that I thought is just like life-giving information for moms that are listening. So one of the things that I noticed about when you were talking about how you prepared, because she did some really excellent blog posts, and I'm going to actually include those in the show notes for everybody to go check out because I just think they're chock full of really good information. But one of the things that you talked about was the importance of how you took care of your body. And obviously, with you being this fitness influencer or fitness being a really big part of your life and healthy eating, I would love for you to kind of start off and talk about how you prepped your body that way, and how you felt during your pregnancy, because I think the two go hand in hand quite often. And so I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Well, first of all, I just have to give you a lot of credit because when I got pregnant back in July, I had no idea what I was doing. I had no idea about the birth process. I had no idea about labor, but I knew I wanted to try and do it exactly how I wanted to do it. I just didn't have the tools to get there. And so I put out on my Instagram, what podcasts do you like? What resources do you like? And you were actually um, told by many people, hey, you should listen to My Essential Birth. They really are an amazing resource for the type of birth that you want. And so I have to give you a lot of credit because you helped me in a ton of different areas. So I cannot move forward with this podcast before saying all of that piece. So just thank you for everything. But yes, so obviously I have been in fitness for a very long time. I've always worked out, 4 to 5 days a week. I've always tried to keep cardiovascular health healthy, top of mind. I've always tried to eat nutrient dense foods. And that's why, going into pregnancy, when all of those different changes are happening, first trimester, you're waking up so nauseous, you are not able to work out because you might be so sick or so exhausted. I think starting fitness as a part of my life before getting pregnant was really helpful during my pregnancy so that on the days that I did feel good enough to move my body in a way that was preparing me to stay strong during labor and stay strong cardiovascular wise. I was able to do that because I had the prior background of fitness. So I would say if you are trying to get pregnant right now, there's no better way to start fitness and working on that healthy routine than right now, because when you get into pregnancy, you don't want to shock your body. You want your body to know exactly what it's doing. But that being said, your goals kind of have to shift during pregnancy. It's no longer to look a certain way if that's your goal. You really have to shift your mindset into, I'm doing this for my child and to have the best labor and delivery experience I can, and even postpartum recovery. And so that's a huge mind shift when you go into pregnancy because your health and fitness goals definitely shift into more of that aspect, which is also a whole different realm than maybe you're used to. So I think that making sure after that first trimester, of course, if you're sick like I was, making sure you're doing your walks when you can, and maybe it's just going in the gym for 30 minutes to do a light or body weight leg day or some push-ups or whatever your body's feeling that day, listening to your body, but also reminding yourself that if you continue to stay consistent throughout your pregnancy, your body's going to be prepped for, I felt like what was my labor, like a marathon, essentially training for that marathon, which will be your birth story at the end of the day. And so I think that having that top of mind, like keeping my legs strong, keeping my arms strong, and just keeping myself as healthy as I could, I knew that that was my main goal at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I appreciate the fact that you come from that fitness background and being able to say, and it was like a marathon. So it's no joke. There's a lot of energy expelled. There is a lot, and it's not just the physical stuff. There's the mental game. But if your body is not physically prepared to handle it, like between that, the mind, what's happening in your mind and the physical things that are happening to your body, there's no getting around it. Like, yes, if you're told like in the next 9 months you will be running a marathon and you do nothing to prepare, you're going to feel that. Just like if you do something to prepare, you will notice the benefits of it. So I greatly appreciate you sharing that.
Exactly. And with your podcast, I mean, I had no idea what to expect. I've never seen a labor or birth or anything. And so with you hammering that into my brain right off the bat, it helped so much. Just like realizing what your body will go through that day and prepping for it was huge. So again, have to give credit to you.
Well, and thank you. My favorite thing is to hear that people listen to what I am talking about and then do the things. That is hands down the reason why I'm here. It is not just a talk, which I will talk about birth with anybody who wants to listen all day long. But my favorite thing is watching the progression and that usefulness of it. So I love, love, love that you had the experience that you had, because that's where I'm like singing your praises on this side, because I'm like, you did the thing, you did all the work and you put it into practice. And now you have this killer birth story to share with the world. So it's so cool. And in fact, one of the things I read on your blog post on your site that you talk about is some of the strength that you gleaned from actually came from your mom. So you had said 3 out of her 4 babies were born unmedicated, and that you found some power and strength in that, and also kind of the idea behind it, where like that might be where you want to go. Will you take a moment and chat about that?
Yes, definitely. So when my mom had, I'm the first baby, firstborn. When my mom had me, she went in with not really an expectation of what she wanted out of her birth. And that ended in her getting an epidural. And I don't think epidurals are bad by any means. I think that with her reaction to it, I knew that with her epidural story and then her unmedicated stories that I really wanted to try to go the unmedicated route because she ended up having a really great experience that way. And I was very inspired by her in a lot of ways, just strength wise. I think that it's really cool to experience it on as much of a level that you can. And I was like, okay, I think unmedicated is the route for me. And you know, there's so many people that have different preferences, and you always have to do at the end of the day what's right for you and what you want. And that's just something that I wanted. And so I knew that if she could get through it, I could get through it. And it's funny because during my actual labor, she popped in because she brought us some Chick-fil-A. Mind you, couldn't eat a single nugget, but just having her there and her energy really helped me get through the process because I knew that she had went through it and that she was strong enough to do it. So she was a huge inspiration for the birth that I wanted, and I thought that it was very special that I was able to achieve that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think we maybe don't take into consideration is kind of exactly what you said, and that is the power of women who have gone before us being in our birth space. And maybe I don't talk about it in that way as much as I should, but as a doula, and as somebody who's had a doula in my birth space, and say my mother-in-law, same thing. She had a baby at home. She was totally encouraging. She was in my birth space. There is power in that. And it's a really strengthening, encouraging, incredible thing just to know that somebody else there, just knowing that they've been through this, they've done it before. So I don't have to freak out. They're not freaking out. I don't have to freak out. It's very
Yeah,
powerful.
you can do this. Like, there's something to be told of, yes, your husband being there and being your birth partner and being so supportive, doing the exercises with you. But there's just a level of feminine energy, but also another level of the feminine energy that has actually done it. And for people that ask me advice on how to do unmedicated, that's probably the first thing that I tell them is like, your birth partner is so important, but having somebody there that has that special energy 1,000% helps.
Yes. I love that so much. Let's talk about your pregnancy just a touch. So, did you have anything that was unique or stood out? And I know towards the end, and we'll get into that in a little bit, definitely there was some differences or some things that you had to deal with. But was there anything that stood out during your pregnancy in the way of your body or things that you went through? And then kind of jumping into providers, because I am really excited for you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so my pregnancy, it was great. First trimester, I'm one of the unfortunate ones that got sick, and just didn't feel my best. But after that, it was like a flip of a switch, and I started to feel so great, and I started to really enjoy being pregnant. I thought it was a very special process. Um, it's funny because I was listening to your episodes, and you started talking about prodromal labor. And at the time, I was probably halfway through my pregnancy, and I was like, oh, wow, that sounds really hard. I hope I don't get something like that. And it ends up, third trimester, my body just starts getting the prodromal labor very often. And so that was definitely something that I think mentally is a really hard thing to go through. But just knowing what it was right off the bat, and when my body started to experience the cramping and just maybe even like mild contractions very early on, I knew what to expect. But that part was a little tiring mentally because you have to stay strong all the way through until you actually give labor. Um, but in a way, it kind of prepares you slightly. Like, this is a little bit of what your body's going to feel like. How are you going to react mentally? How are you going to breathe through it? So I think at the end of the day, while it is hard to go through, it does prep you in a way, especially as a first time mom. And then caregivers. Yes. Do you want me to dive into that?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So, like I said at the beginning, I had no idea about pregnancy at all. I had no idea what type of, or I knew the type of birth I wanted. I didn't know how to get there. So I just chose a hospital by my house and was like, this looks great. It's a beautiful hospital. The rooms are great. This is where I want to give birth. And as I started to educate myself and feel more empowered by the decisions I wanted for my body and my labor and just the type of birth I wanted, things just didn't, they started to not align with that provider. I started to ask questions, and their demeanor was a little off-putting, and B, I wasn't loving what I was hearing. So, for instance, when I asked them their C-section rate and they told me 40%, I knew right off the bat that maybe an unmedicated birth was going to be a little bit hard to support at that hospital, at that caregiver's place. So I started to like kind of be taken aback and do a little bit more research and be like, okay, I know I'm a little bit later in my pregnancy, but this internally does not feel right. Like something's off. And so as I continued to research, I tried to find something that was a little more midwife-ish, but also in a hospital. And so I found a really great hospital, had to switch, um, which was a little bit difficult, but I'm so happy I did at the end of the day because the hospital I was in, while it wasn't perfect, it was a lot better than what I had been experiencing prior. And so I think that no matter the stage you're at in your pregnancy, no matter how far you are along, like it's okay. Just coming from someone that's done it, it's okay to switch last minute. If something in your gut is telling you something's off, it probably is because the couple friends that I have around me in my area that ended up giving birth after me at that previous hospital both had C-sections. So
Wow.
there's just something to be told about God putting something on your heart.
I love that. One of the things that I was curious about, and I know other women might be as well, and I do have a list of questions that you can ask your provider, and I'm going to put that in the show notes. But you mentioned one of the questions that you asked that stood out. What questions did it for you that was like red flag, hitting your heart, red flag, this doesn't sound right?
Well, the very first time I met the provider, we immediately went into epidural. We immediately went into not even asking me the type of birth that I wanted. It kind of just they kind of laid out what they do at their hospital. And I had no idea what I was doing. I was like, oh, yeah, like that sounds great, you know? So that was a huge one to me. I think the fact that it was very like an impersonal experience every time I went in was a huge red flag to me. And a midwife versus a doctor. I started to notice the difference between the way they interacted with me personally. I started to feel a little bit more uncomfortable opening up to the OB versus when I would hear about a midwife, I I felt completely different and way more open. And now I know now I know with what I like going through labor that if you feel closed off to the person you're speaking to about something so that's going to change your life, you have to feel open because otherwise your body's not going to be open. Which I learned, going through the labor process. And so those were huge red flags. And then weeks later, the C-section thing, I was like, okay, this is the nail in the coffin. I gotta go.
And remind me, how many weeks were you at that point?
I was halfway through. I don't know exactly how many weeks, but I was halfway through and it was really scary. It was really scary because I felt cuckoo. The only person that I felt like aligned with what I wanted was my mom, and then, which was 30 years ago, so things have changed, and then your podcast and maybe like one other podcast. So yeah, I felt like with the like telling telling us what to ask your provider was a huge thing for me. I got my notes out, I started listing them, and I didn't love what I was hearing.
I love it. I love that you did the work. So did you switch from an OB to a midwife practice then?
I did, and the hospital I went to, while it's not perfect because one of the things I don't love was I was seeing someone different every single time, and they have OBs and midwives, which I don't know if that's common, but I was, yeah, I was, every time I would go in and speak to a midwife, that's who I would try and schedule with again. And it's funny because when I actually went into labor, I was the person on call was an OB at the time, and everything I was being told wasn't aligning. So moving forward, I might even try to find a hospital that's even more midwife focused, because the experience the other way, it just wasn't aligning.
That's awesome. I mean, not that it wasn't aligning. It's awesome that you were like, you caught it and you're like, we're gonna work as far as we can this way to make this work for what I'm looking for, which is really cool. I do want to take a moment and talk about your husband because all throughout your blog posts, all throughout your birth stories and all of this, it's like he was your rock and he was so involved. So I want to hear kind of how he supported you and how you involved him in such a way that made him excited to learn the information and really hands on with what he did.
I think at the start, him just knowing that he would be coming to every appointment that he could be and being as involved as he could be, even if he had to work, was really great to see. And we've been together since we were 18. I'm now 31. So we've been together for a long time. But like almost relationship wise, that was a huge, just like pivotal moment in our marriage when he decided from day one that he was going to be there for me. And I didn't even have to ask him. So that was really big. But as we continued to go on and as I started to, share information of like, this is what I need from you. I'm not going to be able to really like speak when I'm in labor because I'm being so much pain. I need you to know all these things. He started to strap in and just really take the information and listen to the podcasts himself too and take it seriously, which I'm so grateful for because I truly like having a strong birth partner is very important. And now I'm a firm believer in that because when you're focused on birthing a baby, the last thing you want is to make decisions that are going to be pivotal for that day. So, like, as you're, gripping onto your stress balls or on that mattress on the floor, telling them okay, she needs she doesn't want medication or like telling them don't tell her what centimeter she's dilated at. Like those are things that are very important and to have them be included in. But some of the things we did were practice exercises during labor. So, I literally just Googled labor exercises. That's what I did. There's probably a better way, but we were practicing all sorts of stuff a few weeks prior, and there's a lot of mental work that I realized you had to do beforehand. So I had to make sure that he drew the blinds, made the room dark, got the lavender scents. Like he had tasks essentially that he had in his brain. And I think that made him feel like important and empowered as well. So just going in there as a team versus like me screaming at him on the bed because I'm in pain, I think was also what helped me achieve the unmedicated birth.
Yeah, that was awesome. It was some of my favorite parts reading through was how well you clearly like worked together. You had a plan. You had obviously communicated well, and he was just on board. It was like I could just kind of like hovering over the birth story, watching him just like in the background doing all the things. And that is so powerful because it's one less thing you have to worry about. You're not having to worry about his feelings and all of that kind of stuff. Like, he's just part of this with you. And would you say it's like one of the most bonding things you could possibly do is to go through birth together? Like more so than making the baby, right? Like going through the act of
Oh
birthing a
my
baby.
gosh.
Yes.
Yes, it is so like our relationship changed so drastically after that because what you go through during that process is insane. And to have someone there be by your side and get you through it mentally, verbally, physically is like it takes your relationship to another level. So yes, 1,000%, of course, making the baby is a layer, but actually birthing, I can't wait to do it again because of that.
That is so cool.
It's really
That's my
special.
favorite. All right, let's what everyone is wanting to know. Let's dive into the birth. So talk us through the very beginning. Now you talked about you had 6 weeks of prodromal labor and all of that, but tell me because I read your birth story and these ladies have not. So tell me all the details.
Okay, let's see where to start. Yes, 6 weeks of prodromal labor, which thank you again for telling me what that was. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm giving birth right now, Steve. Like this baby's gonna be premature. Joke's on me. Didn't come till 6 weeks later. But yeah, so the prodromal labor just very crampy and like mild contractions, and that all day long you're like, please, I want to have the baby tonight, but then the baby doesn't come. So 6 weeks later, my due date was March 26th, and I thought for sure I would have him early. But at the time, we were finishing up building our house, and we were in between houses. So Steve and I were living at my parents' house. But I had something in my mind where I was like, Mom and Dad, I love you so much, but I do not want to have the baby here. Like, I want to experience this with Steve in our home and our baby, just like have it be so intimate. So I think I had that in the back of my mind, and I truly believe that's why Dallas waited until we came in this house because 5 days later, when we got here, we moved in, we all the boxes, we unpacked, everything was settled. The very next day, 5 days later, after the boxes were done, he came. So I think that it's so powerful what you're thinking. Any mental block, it's true. Like your body knows it's it's time or it's not time. And so I think like for the next pregnancy, I'm going to be very cognizant of what is blocking me and like my environment around me because it made all the difference. So 5 days later, we moved in. One night, I think I was 5, 6 days late or something like that, just waiting for Dallas to come. Our neighbors come up the driveway, they ring the doorbell, and they're giving us a gift basket for being the new neighbors in town. And so we open the door, we're chatting for a few minutes, and all of a sudden I'm just like breathing a little hard, and I get a trickle down my leg. And I don't say anything because it's like uncomfortable. I don't know them. I'm like, did my water just break? It was just a weird situation. So I waited until they left, and I looked at Steve. I was like, Steve, my water just broke. And so I actually let me back up. Let's talk about the sweeps,
Yes.
the membrane sweeps. So a few days prior,
So tell us how many
I
weeks
went
pregnant
into
you
my
were. Start with that. Because, like, why the sweep came
Yes,
up.
so the sweep came up. So I went in for my, I believe, 40-week appointment. And they said, hey, I'm so sorry to let you know, but at this hospital, we don't allow you to go past 42 weeks. And they're like, we have to schedule an induction, which I think at that point, I I know that you can safely go past 42 weeks. But at the time when they're telling me like all the risks and I'm so close to having him, I felt a little scared. And so I was like, is this not the right thing to do? Should I listen to what they're telling me? And so I was like, okay, I'm scheduling the induction, but I'm going to do everything I can mentally and physically to have this baby. So that's something I didn't feel too good about. And then at that appointment as well, they were like, something that does help speed it up naturally is to do a membrane sweep. And I had no idea what to expect. But I did research that, and I've heard from podcasts that could help speed up the process. So I did it. For me, very uncomfortable. I have friends that don't even bat an eyelash, but for me, hated it so much. Like that's probably the one thing that I am not looking forward to in the future. But a few days later, I had the sweep. I go home and my contractions start coming on. And at the time, we had just moved in, like I said. So we had people around us finishing the house inside. I mean, there was probably 20 people here finishing work. And so I, with those contractions, went down to the basement guest room and locked myself in a room and just tried to breathe through them and relax. But again, that mental block, I didn't feel completely comfortable in my space. And so after, you know, a few hours of that, they started to minimize a little bit. And as the day went on into the evening, our neighbors came over to hand us a gift basket as, their new neighbors. And as we were chatting with them, I started breathing a little heavy and there was a trickle down my leg of water. And I felt uncomfortable, being like, you guys gotta go, my water broke. Like I didn't know them. And so I kind of stood there for a few minutes just playing it off cool. But then they left and I looked at Steve and I was like, Steve, my water broke. And I was like, it was for sure the sweep. Like it did the job. Like, let's go, let's call the doctor. And so the doctor that was on call that night was an OB. And she said, okay, great. You might as well come in. I was like, is there any way that I can labor at home for a little bit? I don't feel like I'm too far along. I'm still breathing nicely. Contractions are pretty far apart. She was like, yeah, sure. Just make sure to come before in the morning because we can't have your water break and you come 24 hours after because of a risk of infection. And so I was like, oh, okay, that sounds good. Hang up the phone. We go to sleep. And unfortunately, I wake up with no contractions. The contractions had gone, and I was disappointed for sure. So I called the doctor, who again was an OB on staff, and she said, okay, like I know your contractions are not there anymore, but we still need you to come in so we can induce you and move this process along because your water did break and I can't have you go past 24 hours. And so I was very upset at the time because I just knew after all the work that I had done, you always tell yourself, like, okay, if anything happens, I'm going to be fine with it. I'm going to be fluid. But truly, when you're in the moment, for me personally, I was upset because I had dreamt up and really planned and prepared for this unmedicated birth. And I knew at that moment that's probably not going to happen. And so I was just like going to the hospital, packed our bags, put them in the car, went, and I just wasn't excited. I got there and the front desk gal kind of looked at me weird because she's like, this girl isn't in labor, but I have to ask if she wants a wheelchair. And I'm like, no, I don't need a wheelchair. I'm good. We go upstairs, settle into the room, and the nurses come in and start telling me, the plan for the day. And they put the saline lock in, which by the way was the most uncomfortable part of the morning, which is funny. They make a plan, and finally there's a staff shift, which was a midwife. I had seen before. So she comes in and she's like, you know what? I don't want to induce you right now. I know your goal for your birth is to be unmedicated. Let's try one more sweep because I feel that that's the right thing to do to progress you, even though it's not like the most natural way. I feel like we can do it without, going the medicated route. So we did a sweep and again, very uncomfortable. And then they checked for my water and they said, unfortunately, it must have just been some fluids. Your water didn't break either. So I'm going to give you until noon. I hope that this sweep worked because I feel like if you don't want to leave here, we just should induce you, break your water, and get it going. So while the midwife aligned with me, it wasn't completely aligned, but at least it was better than the previous option. So I looked at Steve when the nurses and midwife left, and I said, "I'm not leaving this hospital. I'm having this baby. I'm having this baby today." And so he was like, kind of laughing. He's like, "Okay, okay, Taylor." And I was like, "No, I'm serious. Like, let's get to work." So we got to work, drew the blinds, turned on music, put the lavender scent everywhere, put the mattress out, got the Basu ball, and we started just like moving around, bouncing on the ball, doing different labor positions and like circuits that we knew how. And a few hours later, I think at around 10:30, it started to happen. My labor started to progress. I felt like mentally and physically safe and supported, and my body started to respond, aligning those thoughts. And so the doctor comes in, and I told them at the very start, I don't want to know where I'm at centimeter wise because I don't want to be discouraged if, I have a long ways to go. And so they came in and they did the check and they held up fingers to Steve. I think it was like 5 fingers or 4 fingers. And they were like, okay, like keep going, keep moving. Finally, at lunchtime, the midwife comes in. She took one look at me and she was like, "We don't need to do anything. She's in labor." And so, like at that moment, I don't even remember it, but I just know that we were moving and grooving, just kind of breathing. And it's funny because everyone tells you you're not going to remember your labor, and it's so true because so many parts of the day were fuzzy. But there is something to be said about writing down what you can remember and what your partner recollects, because that's the only reason I have any memory of that day is because I write it down. So definitely write down your birth story right after. But the day was a little bit fuzzy. I know that the like moaning of birth is so real. I would watch videos of women going through birth, and I was like, your body makes those noises, like there's no way. But the involuntary willing of your voice is insane. Just having that partner by me for the whole time was really important. I know that. And then I know that at 3:30 in the day, when I started to get physically and mentally exhausted, God always puts like strength where you need. And I think at that moment it was my mom. And at that time when she came to bring Chick-fil-A to me, um, she wasn't planning on staying, but the way that she was like helping me breathe and her presence, her energy there with Steve combined into one, I just had like a burst of energy to get through because I knew that I think it was like 15 to 20 minutes before she got there. I looked at Steve and I was like, I can't do this. Like I have to get the epidural. Like we need to call the nurses. And there's only so much reminding he can do. Like, you can do this. I know you can do this. So I think it's just funny looking back that God really brought her there when I needed that extra push. And so the day goes on, and I think a few hours later, I got offered laughing gas, nitric oxide, and I was totally open to that from the beginning, because I knew that it could help take off a little bit of the edge of pain. So I got I got that and I started breathing it in, and I felt so nauseous and so sick after, which was really sad to me because it was helping a lot with just subsiding some sort of pain. Um, but then one of the nurses came in and was like, "We can give you Zofran in your what's this called?
Your IV.
Yes, in your IV to help with that." And I was like, "Okay, but only half a dose," because I was just so, I'm doing this myself. Which, looking back, just do the full dose of Zofran. But but it helped so much. Like, if anyone out there is open to nitric oxide and Zofran, that personally helped me a lot with my first labor and delivery, for the last hour or two. Um, but kept going, kept going. That gave me a little bit more of strength, a little bit less pain, and I started to get very exhausted again with those signs that God gives you. This might be like maybe TMI, but just holding onto the bed, looking down and seeing like a couple trickles of blood, I was like, okay, I can do this. So I truly believe that God gives you signs to keep going right when you need them, and you just have to look out for them. And so I was like, okay, I can do this, I can do this. Um, we started, trying to get into different positions, and all of a sudden I felt like pushing. And now I know what everyone means when they say your body is going to involuntary feel like, for me it felt like like I wanted to throw up, like that kind of involuntary feeling of wanting to push. And so I was like, oh my gosh, this is a wild feeling. I have to push. And so they called the midwife very calmly with the lights low. They started very calmly bringing in the equipment. They checked me, which at the time wasn't the most awkward position looking back, but at the time you really don't care. You just want the baby to get here. And so they checked me and they were like, okay, guys, like she's ready. We need to get the midwife in here. And I started to push, and the midwife got me into a lot of different positions, which was shocking to me because when you're in labor, you think that any position is going to be comfortable. But for me, at least, there was only one position that I wanted to be in. I didn't want to be in any other position because it hurts. But looking back, I feel like what hurts might help you progress further. So I think moving forward, I'll probably be more open to moving around uncomfortably. But the positions that ended up working for me was like hanging on a bar on the bed, like in a squat position, um, and then just like on hands and knees. And then the very final pushes, I remember being so exhausted, like scary exhausted. My mom started to get a little concerned, and the midwife could sense that, and so she said, "Hey, Steve, she needs your support right now. I need you to get behind her and like physically hold her for these last two pushes." And I truly believe that helped so much just comfort me in the moment, because after two pushes, he finally came out, and it was an amazing experience because I was like kind of laying on his lap, and we brought Dallas up. He immediately latched on, and it was the craziest experience of my life.
And so awesome, so life-changing and so special, and now you get to share it with the world, which I think is so cool.
Exactly. Yes. Oh my God. So amazing. So awesome.
You did mention in your post, and you kind of mentioned God along throughout here, but you said the two things that helped you the most were educating yourself and prayer during labor. Can you touch on that just for a moment, like how you utilized prayer for your labor?
Yeah. So I think that in the moment when you are going through something so hard, one of the only things that seems to help is just leaning on God and knowing that He's there. But just, you can have, for me personally, I bought the affirmation cards. I bought like, I had an idea of what I like, worship music. Like, I had an idea of what I wanted it to look like. Didn't utilize any of that. The strongest things looking back that helped me was just like believing in myself and praying that I could get through this because so many other women could get through this. And then praying for little glimpses of energy when I needed them because there are times where you don't think you can get through it unless you have a higher power to push you through. And so for me, I think just giving me like the confidence and the people around me and the tools I needed around me at that moment helped a lot.
I love that. Okay, I want to ask you one more question about your labor experience before we move into postpartum. And I don't want to be on here forever. I know I'm taking a lot of your time, but you had some really important things.
No, I feel bad.
No, it's perfect.
I chatted so long.
It's so good. But I think there's some really important things that you said about postpartum and how like you didn't feel prepared for that and what women can expect that I think will be really helpful. Okay, so for my pregnancy question, and I know this is a question like moms just want to know, you had mentioned the prodromal labor contractions and how they felt kind of like crampy and like period cramps and that kind of stuff. And then the difference, you said you noticed the difference when it switched into a different kind of contraction. And then you discussed the pushing contractions. So, what was that difference? How did they feel to you during your labor? And it sounds like you used movement and your husband to get through them. But if anything different there, then let me know.
Okay. Yes. So the difference, if you've never been through birth before, when you go through prodromal contractions, they feel like the worst period cramps you've ever had in your life. Just like for me, it was full belly, like lower, just contractions, like period pains. And I'm like, oh, for sure, this is it. Oh God, I'm in labor. But when you actually get in a labor, for me at least, they're the same contractions, but just more intense. Like just a ball and then a release, and then a ball and then a release. Like so much so where if you breathe and you work with your body, it helps a lot. If you do things that take your mind off of it as much as possible, I think it helps a lot. But the breathing, like when my mom came in and told me to breathe, although very hard, that helps a ton. But they're definitely a lot stronger than those prodromal contractions. And then in terms of the pushing, that was for me more of like that felt totally different, more of like a dropping motion of like everything's dropping involuntarily and I want to like push it out. So very much so like puking, but the other way. So I don't even I don't even know if it hurt for me as much as like the contractions, which for some women it's completely different. But when it starts like the pushing part, I didn't really mind those as much as the actual contractions.
Yeah, that's a really common thing that moms say too, for sure. Like once they get there, they're like, "Yes, finally I can work with these.
Yeah.
I'm not getting out of the way. I'm an active participant in
Yeah.
the labor at this point."
Exactly. Yes.
Okay, so let's chat postpartum. So that baby is born, and then you kind of went over, and then the birth of the placenta, and then how you felt the next 24 hours and the next couple of days, and how you weren't necessarily prepared for that, or what advice you'd like to give to moms, and dads that are listening about that postpartum phase.
Yeah, totally. So, transparently, I did have, I think, a first degree tear, which that to a lot of women is scary, but let me tell you, when you have your baby on you in the moment and they are doing what they need to do to heal that area, it's not really top of mind. You're just with your baby, you're with your partner, and you just got through something so incredible. So to me, that was really not an issue. What is a weird feeling is you have a human inside of you for so long that when you stand up from that bed, you feel hollow. That was the weirdest feeling. You feel so hollow and just like, I like crouched down and walked around because I just was the feeling was just so unnatural to me. But one thing they don't tell you, or one thing that I didn't know, was the peeing aspect after you give labor. I sat down to pee because I really had to pee, and I couldn't. And that's something that they look for, at least when you're in the hospital, is to pee like within the first hour or two. And then when it's in your head, pressure, like, oh my God, I had to pee, it makes it worse. It makes it worse. But eventually, just relax your mind because you will be able to. It just relaxing your body and your mind and knowing that you're going to be okay is huge. But everything's great. We get home and, I 2 weeks later, I feel just still so exhausted. I feel heavy down there. I can't really walk around. And I'm like, I don't know, talking to my friends, they seem to be fine by this point, and I'm not fine. I am pale. I have chills, like something is going on. And so I get back into my doctor and I ended up having an infection, which is so painful. Went through 3 rounds of antibiotics, and I don't really know what it what was caused by it. I think maybe the checks or the sweeps. I mean, there's granted to be something that has been inside my body during that time, and maybe not everything was 100% sterile. So, going through an infection, if you guys feel like pain and like things aren't right, trust your gut and go in because granted, they're probably not right.
Yeah. Well, and you also talked about how important it was. Like you had some stuff set up for you when you got home too, in the way of like a postpartum caddy or just some things that like made it easier. Where you're like, I'm glad I had researched some of this stuff so I knew how to take care of my body postpartum. And you kind of joked that, and I didn't know how to utilize these things, but your care providers taught you how to use those things like before you got home, right?
Yes, oh my gosh, exactly. Like I remember going online and researching all the things I needed postpartum, but then when it comes down to actually knowing how to use like the peri bottle and the ice packs, I had no idea. So the nurse that I had at the very last few hours of my labor was an angel, again, a God thing because she helped me just mentally. She was very sweet and really worked with my energy. And she was the one who taught me exactly how to use like the diaper and the pads and just things that I don't know if women don't feel comfortable talking about because it's like not cute or they don't want to scare other women. But I just had no idea. And so I'm glad that we're talking about this now so that everyone can know what to expect. But yeah, so they taught me how to use it, came home. I think that having you're going to be exhausted. You have a new baby. You're trying to figure out how to take care of a new life. Like the last thing that you're going to want to go do is go to the grocery store or go to Target to get all of these things. So having a caddy was really important. Having Dallas's like diapers and all the essentials that he needs was really important. But I would say that postpartum care was great. One thing I would add is if people are trying, like your family and friends are trying to support you, one of the most important things I think is meals. Having them bring meals to you is also a great way, like, to be prepared postpartum.
Yeah, I love that. For those that are listening, I'll definitely put a link in the show notes for the My Essential Birth course, but also the postpartum course. This is the kind of stuff that we go over there. I definitely touch on it for the postpartum section in the birth course towards the end, like what you'll need in that in your postpartum caddy and all of that. But there's some like details that get missed where we're like so focused on the labor and the birth, and that's the exciting part. Not that having the baby and stuff isn't, obviously that's the end goal, but you get so worked up and excited about preparing for this birth. And then once that's over, it's like, poof, you are like launched into postpartum, taking care of a newborn, dealing with your body for the next several weeks. Like there's a lot that comes after the birth of the baby. And so, yes, there's some details there. Taylor, I love to end these episodes with your favorite, your very best advice for moms and best advice for dads. Just if you could sum it up in like a sentence or two, like if you could say one thing to the women and the men listening, what that would be. And then I want to also include everywhere that people can find you and connect with you, because I think that what you do is awesome and who you are is pretty amazing. And it's fun to watch your motherhood journey as well.
Oh my gosh, Stephanie, you are just such an angel. Thank you so much. For mothers, for new moms especially, I think that it is very important to follow your gut. Now, going into hopefully a second pregnancy in the fall, I will be so much more confident knowing that no, like nobody else knows your body more than you, or no, your provider doesn't know more than you. You truly know more than you think you know. So lean into those feelings, lean into your gut, because once you have your baby, you're going to look back and realize you were right all along. That's what I'd say to any mom out there and to any partner. I would say really take very seriously what your partner wants for their birth. I think when they tell you to prepare, it may seem too much or maybe even silly to you, but to them, it will make their entire world if you just put as much effort into that as they would. And so I would say for that, be as knowledgeable as your partner because the outcome, as long as you work as a team, will be 10 times better. And then social wise, so on Instagram and TikTok, it's at Tay Che because my previous last name was Chamberlain. So Taychayy. I have lots of blogs on my website about babies and births and all the things. So that's taylordilk.com. And then my athletic wear brand is called Vitality. It's shopvitality.com.
I love it. Well, thank you, Taylor. Thank you for your time, for your wisdom, and for your energy. This episode is going to be really good for everybody that gets to listen. So I appreciate you being here today.
Oh my gosh, I am again so honored, Stephanie. What you do is just huge and creates such an impact in the world. And thank you so much for having me.